Shabbat Shalom. For reasons that shortly will be obvious, I want to dedicate my Devar Torah to my mother's first cousin, Fanny, her husband, Albert, and their son. They were French Jews born in France after the Nazis and their French collaborators occupied Paris. They complied with an edict to register as Jews at the local police department. In October 1942, they were detained, sent to the Drancy camp. They were there to the first week of February, when they were put on a French train to Auschwitz. And on February 13th, 1943, were gassed at the concentration camp. So I dedicate tonight to them. Fanny lives in me every day when I go to work. Every time I meet a client, every time I go to immigration court, she is alive in me, and she's alive in me tonight. The book of Exodus, which we continue reading the Shabbat, instructs us regarding our obligations to the strangers among us. Chapter 22, verse 20 of Exodus commands, "You shall not oppress the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt." Indeed, no less than 36 times, our Torah mandates that we protect the strangers in our midst. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 34 gets right to the point. "The strangers who reside with you shall be to you as your citizens, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt." The story of our Exodus has resonated through my life. As a young child, I saw the parallels between our Exodus from Egypt and the mass departure of Jews from Eastern Europe between the 1880s and World War I. During this period, millions of Jews emigrated from Eastern Europe to the United States, Canada, and Latin America, seeking safety from the perils of anti-Semitism. The difficulties my own family faced in this journey highlight the opposition to the immigration of Jews to the United States. In 1911, my maternal grandmother, Malcha, a 17-year-old orphan, and her 12-year-old sister, Rose, were denied entry to the United States at Ellis Island because their brother-in-law was a leader in the garment workers' strike of 1910 in Chicago, which led to the formation of the Amalgamated Clothing Workers Union. In 1927, my 8-year-old mother and her parents and her siblings, including my Aunt Eileen, who was a U.S. citizen because of her birth in Chicago, were deported back to Canada for having entered the United States illegally. Restrictive immigration quotas enacted after World War I barred them from immigrating lawfully to the United States. These same restrictive quotas prevented millions of Jews in Europe from finding safety in the United States before or during the Holocaust, condemning members of my family and many of yours to death in the ghettos and concentration camps of Europe. As a student at Evanston Township High School in the mid-1960s, I saw the parallels between our exodus from Egyptian slavery and the migration to Evanston of the families of my African-American classmates fleeing Jim Crow segregation in the South. The stories which my classmates' parents shared with me of lynchings and brutal segregation in South Carolina motivated me to join the NAACP Youth Council in high school and fight for racial justice in Evanston, Chicago, and the South. In the 1970s, as a young legal services lawyer in Chicago's Pilsen neighborhood, I saw the parallels between our history and the mass exodus of Mexicans and Central Americans fleeing poverty, political oppression, and violence in the hope of finding safety and prosperity in the United States. For the past 51 years, I've used my skills as a lawyer to defend the rights of immigrants and their communities. There have been significant victories, including the enactment in 1986 of a legalization program that put almost 3 million immigrants on a pathway to lawful permanent residence and U.S. citizenship, and the creation of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals Program, better known by the acronym DACA. There have been also many defeats. However, in all the years I have practiced immigration law, there has been no time as frightening as this week for immigrants and as challenging for those of us committed to defending immigrants. I am here tonight to sound the alarm about what is contained in the 11, and here they are, executive orders. I got all 11 here if anyone wants copies of them. Okay. Trump signed on Tuesday pertaining to actually, I think he signed them on Monday, pertaining to immigrants and other actions taken by his administration this week to advance his agenda of mass deportations and strict limits on legal immigration. In view of the large number of executive orders and other actions taken by Trump and his team in his first week back in office, I only have time to reference the most distressing. Number one, to accomplish mass deportations, the Protecting the American People from Invasion executive order requires undocumented people to register and be fingerprinted so that removal action can be initiated against them. Two, issuance of a U.S. Department of Justice memorandum threatening to prosecute the elected leaders of sanctuary cities and states, including our governor and our mayor, if they fail to cooperate with Trump's plans for mass deportations. Three, subjecting immigrants who cannot prove to an arresting ICE officer that they have been in the United States for at least 2 years to immediate deportation through a process known as expedited removal, with no right to be released on bond or defend themselves before an immigration judge. This makes the arresting ICE officers the policemen, the prosecutors, and the judge. Four, under the Protecting the Meaning and Value of American Citizenship executive order, ending birthright citizenship for children who do not have at least one parent who is a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident. This despite the guarantees of the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution that everyone born here is a citizen. Yesterday, a Reagan-appointed U.S. District Court judge in Seattle, in a lawsuit brought by the state of Illinois and several other states, issued a temporary restraining order barring implementation of the order, calling it blatantly unconstitutional. With a 6-3 right-wing majority on the U.S. Supreme Court, there is no guarantee this ruling will survive. 5, denying migrants at our southern border the right to apply for asylum based on their fear of persecution. 6, suspending the admission of refugees to the United States while the Trump administration determines how refugee admissions can be limited to just refugees who they believe are able to assimilate well into the United States. Okay. First of all, the people who were approved to come as refugees were not allowed to board flights. They were already vetted and they had permits to come to the U.S. stamped in their passports. They were denied the right to come here, and all refugees are barred right now under this suspension, and they will only start accepting refugees once they determine who will be able to assimilate into the United States. I think we all know what that means. Okay. 7, denying employment authorization to immigrants while they have pending applications for asylum, lawful permanent residence, or other immigration benefits. 8, removing the bar to immigration and customs enforcement officers conducting enforcement operations in schools, churches, mosques, synagogues, healthcare institutions, and the courts. 9, conducting an evaluation of the temporary protected status designation of 21 countries that have been granted this designation by the Biden administration and prior administrations due to the violent conflict or climate-related or other catastrophes in their countries. The intention is to take away the protection of temporary protected status and deport hundreds of thousands of people who have this designation, including people from El Salvador, Ukraine, Venezuela, and many other countries. Ending the humanitarian parole status of hundreds of thousands of citizens of Venezuela, Ukraine, Haiti, and Nicaragua who were in the United States with humanitarian parole status. If all of these and other anti-immigration measures Trump's administration announced this week were not enough, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals this month ruled that the DACA program, initially created by President Obama, was illegal, setting the stage for a showdown at the U.S. Supreme Court on the right of over 500,000 DACA recipients to remain in the United States. Carlos, you met? Stand up for a minute. Carlos came to the United States in 5th grade, right? Okay, from Peru. I knew his family in Peru many years ago. He went to Evanston High School, the University of Illinois at Chicago, UIC. He got a master's degree from Arizona State University in special education with an emphasis on autism. He is a board-certified behavioral analyst who works with autistic children. He is one of the DACAs who have no way to remain in our country if DACA is ended. Thanks. How has Trump and his xenophobic team of immigrant haters been able to create such an agenda for mass deportation? The answer lies in their success in villainizing immigrants through lies and falsehoods. First, they have tried to convince us that the undocumented are here because they simply refuse to follow legal pathways to immigration. The reality is that over the last 57 years, Congress has changed our immigration laws to make it virtually impossible for undocumented people to legally immigrate. This was done through the enactment of restrictive numerical limitations and punitive statutory bars that prevent the undocumented from becoming lawful permanent residents even when they are married to U.S. citizens or have U.S. citizen children, parents, or siblings. As a practical matter, you can say Congress created our undocumented population. To give you a sense of how challenging legal immigration is, preference immigrants from Mexico are subject to an annual limitation of 25,620, which makes the wait to immigrate for family-based immigrants one of up to 25 years. These bars to legal immigration are the reasons why most undocumented people cannot immigrate lawfully even though they live in mixed status families with U.S. citizen spouses, children, parents, grandparents, and siblings. Second, they try to convince us that immigrants are criminals. However, crime statistics demonstrate that immigrants commit far fewer crimes than U.S. citizens. Moreover, our immigration laws already bar immigrants with significant criminal convictions from legalizing their status. The only crime most immigrants do is their existence in our country as being undocumented. Third, they try to convince that immigrants are taking the jobs of U.S. citizens. However, most states have a significant shortage of workers, and most U.S. citizens do not want the jobs performed by immigrants. How many of us employ or have employed undocumented people to care for our children, our parents, or our homes, or to work in our places of business? Fourth, they try to convince us that immigrants are a burden on our social welfare system. That is false. Undocumented immigrants are barred from almost all government benefits. In conclusion, I want to urge the Mishkan community to join the resistance to mass deportation. I offer my expertise to help Mishkan figure out how best it can participate in the defense of our immigrant neighbors. Through mass protests, we can stop Trump from fully implementing his agenda for mass deportation. In 2018, the American people stopped through mass protests Trump's child separation policy, which was separating thousands of children from their parents and putting them in cages along the border. We need to convince our fellow Americans that mass deportations will destroy mixed status families in which millions of U.S. citizens and legal immigrants live, and be disastrous for our economy, which depends on immigrant workers to plant and pick our crops, to prepare our food, to manufacture our products, to care for our homes, our children, our elderly, and our disabled. Our religious foreparents who wrote the Torah wisely instructed us no less than 36 times to defend the strangers in our midst, because they understood that one of the most important measures of justice in a society is how its immigrants are treated, and that a society which mistreats its immigrant is ultimately a society in which the well-being of all, and especially that of Jews, is in danger. Thank you.